joining me on the podcast today, Mr. Tony Severio. Tony is a remarkable knife maker. Listen, and I know what I'm looking at. Mr. Tony, thank you so much for coming and visiting with us today. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Right on, man. You have been producing some really, elegant knives, and your Damascus seems to stand out, in my opinion, from what I've seen. A lot of people, and Damascus has gotten, incredibly popular today. And Forged in Fire did so much for the knife world. Some things not so great, and some things really great. And I want to talk about that in a bit. But let's start at the beginning, man. How long have you been making knives?
Well, I started in about 1989, actually making knives. I mean, you can go back to when I was about 14 years old. I made a sharp, pointy object out of saw blade.
Mm-hmm.
But I really didn't pick it back up till around 89, 90, somewhere about that I really got very interested and started tinkering with it, kind of doing the same thing, just sharp, pointy objects. Didn't really know what I was doing, no idea about heat treating, edge geometry, just in general knife design, just making knives.
That was a different time, too. Information was hard to get. You had to find somebody who knew. You could read, but reading, as you well know, gets you a pretty good way, but you got to find people. You got to get a guru,
Well,
It's a different world today.
That's a good point. And there was the internet was in its infancy. I mean, and if anybody had the internet, it was very few people.
Mm-hmm.
It was slow and just
there wasn't much on it either.
Yeah, no information out there. Basically, I did a show. I decided to sell my knives at a show. I was selling them to uncles and aunts and brothers. That's how that goes. Everybody looks at it and goes, "Oh my God," and it was ridiculous because I still have some of those, and it's like I don't even show them to people. But I went to a show and I met Robert and Randy Captapon. They're from Karen Crow, Louisiana. And they looked at my knives. I was at a table next to them, fortunately. And they looked at my knives, and I looked at their knives. And I'm like, I wanted to cover mine up. I'm like, I've been here selling knives with these guys, because I'd been to some of the other tables even in the past, and I'm like, I can do these. But when I saw theirs, there's no comparison. So we became good friends, and they gave me, some advice and said, come, kind of took me under their wing. Randy Captapon, the son of Robert, I went to his shop, and he really showed me some great techniques and how to, do certain things, with bolsters and grinding and just things that, oh man, it just made a world difference. And, I needed some better equipment too, They say that equipment is not everything, but it is definitely help you make better, make it, at least for me, help me make better knives. For one, I was using a Craftsman 4-inch wide sander type thing to do a hollow grind on a 2-inch wheel that was not rubber backed. I still have some of those knives. They're horrible, but it's proof that, a better tool could help you do a better job if you learn how to use it. It's more efficient, the whole 9 yards. I mean, they made knives with stone wheels for years, but
some people still do.
Exactly.
The traditional Japanese knives, a lot of those guys use those big wheels.
That's right.
There's a great, I love one of my favorite words, there's a great catharsis in that whenever you have been struggling with something, and then you finally get the proper tool and you use it, and you're like, oh my goodness. Oh, this is what I've been missing. This is what I needed in my life,
Exactly.
I enjoy that thoroughly as a maker of things. For me, that's a great source of pleasure.
You're right. Well, I mean, you take, the first knife that I made was with a file, but if you look at that knife, look at the plunge lines, the grind lines are horrible. It's I could have done a better job. I can do a better job with a file now. Now I know what I'm doing, what I need to do, but still, with the right tool, I can do way better grinds, have way better grind lines, plunge lines, centering on my blade, and much faster pace, But to me, a knife is not just a sharp, pointy object. It's the whole thing. It is, it's the heat treating, the edge geometry, and the fit and finish.
Yeah, it's a composition.
Yeah, I mean, you could throw some tires on a frame and call it a truck, but it needs a bumper, it needs a paint job.
That's right.
You want something that looks nice and functions.
Mm-hmm.
At least I do. Same in the gun making world. You name it. Everybody wants to make quality pieces.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I wanted to get to, because I could see what you could get to.
So when did you start working with Damascus? When did that journey begin for you?
Well, I was always interested. I was always interested in Damascus. Going back probably 25 years, I saw Darryl Meyer in one of the magazines. It may have been Blade or one of them, I can't remember. And he had an American flag in a Damascus knife. I think he gave it to President Reagan. And it was beautiful. I'm like, that's just incredible. It was a mosaic, with the American flag. And also in that magazine or one of the other was Steve Schwarzer had an article. He's a master smith. He is the oldest living original founder of the ABS, our original founding member.
I saw a video of him speaking.
Yeah,
when they recognized him as the oldest living master smith. Wasn't that the title?
Yeah. It was a Blade award that they give out to every now and then they give out these awards, and it was, in my opinion, way late. He should have had it years ago. There's a story behind all of that, I'm sure, but Steve, going back to the story, Steve was in that magazine with an article, and he had a piece of Damascus, or a Damascus knife, that had a man with a shotgun shooting a flying quail. It was a mosaic, and that blew my mind. And so I immediately started following those guys. And matter of fact, I called Steve, no internet, but his phone number was in that magazine, and I just called him. And I was trying to set up a gas forge and to get started forging knives without coal and venture off into Damascus. And he kind of walked me through how to set it up and that sort of thing. And that's been, over 25 years ago that he just opened up to me and helped me, because, I'm just now to the point. I tested for my journeyman smith stamp this year. I haven't presented my knives, but I tested back in November of last year. It's taken me that many years to get to the point that I decided to do that. And it was mainly because of guys like Steve Schwarzer, Master Smith, J.W. Randall, encouraging me. Because in my earlier days, I just had some experiences with the organizations I just didn't agree with, at least from someone looking on the outside looking in, and it just put me off. Nowadays, I don't see that. It's a well-run organization, the American Bladesmith Society, the Knife Makers Guild, seem to have good groups of people running them, and that's really impressed me. And I want to be a part of the American Bladesmith Society, and so I'm finally going after my journeyman stamp.
Right on.
And so I did pass the performance test, and up at JW Shop in North Louisiana, and a lot of fun. So even though I've done this over 30 plus years, I'm just now to the point where I'm going after my journeyman stamp, and kind of what the past has kind of dictated that for me. There's other things, life gets in the way, and
Sure.
work and other avenues that I took as well at the same time. I mean, I got off into the film industry and off into the martial arts world, which kind of some of that blends with the knife making.
The perseverance that it takes to stay with something and become proficient and be able to produce these beautiful objects, which are it's not easy. I mean, there's a million ways to go wrong. It's, most of the time when I'm making a piece of jewelry, I'm fervently working not to mess it up. It's the things you don't do that ultimately will determine the quality of the piece that you produce. The show that really brought knife making into the public eye and took it from a sort of almost an underground type thing. The knife makers. The Blade Show wasn't heavily attended. I mean, there was knife makers there, and there were knife aficionados of all sorts. But the Forged in Fire series really just like made it blow up, and I think it grabbed onto that idea of what can I do with this, or that knives are an important part of history. Blades in general are an important part of history, and there's something that is very appealing to it. And I think it's done a lot to get interest up, and it's all the knife makers that were on that show weren't great. Some of them were just the best of the best. It drew everybody. It drew people like, I'm sure you watched it. I have. And, you see people show up and you're like, oh, this guy's going to have a hard time. You can just tell, so you see how they use their tools and you're like, this guy's going to struggle,
Well, it's entertainment, and it is a reality TV show. So you're going to have, it's not an educational show. No. And that's where a lot of people have gotten it wrong. I mean, I know some of them, and, people who watched the show and went off to make knives, and for a year and a half, 2 years was making and then started selling and didn't know you're supposed to temper the knife. Just no education, or trying to educate yourself about it. And it has done, like you said, great things for the industry as far as exposure to knife making. And I know maker J.W. Randall, a couple-time winner of that. He was a master smith when he went on there. That's why he's a couple-time winner, world champion. But like you say, they're going to bring folks on there to create drama.
That's right.
It's not about educating you. Just you got all these cutting tests and just crazy stuff. But and if you like that kind of thing, I'm not a competitive person. I could care less about competing. They asked me to come to the show. They asked me to apply for the show. Their producers did, and I just told them I'm just not interested. For one, you get paid if you win. You don't get paid anything if you lose. I mean, even though you're a cast member, you don't get paid. Now, I come from the film and television industry, and every cast member gets paid. There's no winners and losers. Whether you're working on whatever reality TV show, you get paid. Well, that's not the case there. They don't promote you either. They don't, they mention your name right up front, and that's it. So you're just a tool to make money for the show.
It's almost like a game show.
It's exactly what Jason Knight put it best. It's a reality TV show. He said, don't aspire to go on TV. He said, aspire to make good knives.
You've kind of narrowed it, I've noticed, and you're producing a more consistent type of blade.
Right, yeah. Well, going back to when I first started and to now, my knife patterns, knife styles have changed a lot, and it's mainly due to the users, to the buyers. I made tactical knives and you name it. Going back to my martial arts years, originally my knife making didn't have anything to do with it. There was no connection. But eventually I got interested in the knife side of the martial arts world, and it's how I went off in the direction I did in the martial arts. I went off into the knife arts, like Eskrima, Arnis, and Kali. It's how I met Dan Inosanto and 3 of Bruce Lee's proteges that were his students, and I got to train with them. And I was a apprentice under Ted Wong, his last private student, and it all had to do with how to apply knife fighting, knife defense in the martial arts is what intrigued me and interested me. I say now a knife is strictly a defensive weapon, just like a stick is or whatever, but your legs are the most powerful weapon, and that's running from a knife or a gun or anything. Talk yourself out of a fight. That is highly, that is a best technique. But that's where I went off into. So my knives kind of went into that tactical look. Nowadays, to me, a butcher knife is tactical. You just make it tactical. It has nothing to do with the shape or any of that stuff. But that's a whole different subject. If it cuts, sticks, and slices, it's tactical. A pencil will do that too.
Yeah, a hammer.
Exactly. It's our current world has definitions. Just like you just said it a while ago. I grew up having knives on me when I was a kid. My dad was an avid outdoorsman, hunting, fishing. So he put knives in our hands at an early age to dress game, skin fish, you name it. We didn't realize that nowadays they'd be, stigmatized as weapons.
Sure. I carried a knife to school most of my life.
Exactly. Teachers would borrow them from me. Anybody got a knife I can borrow? We had guns on our gun racks in the parking lot in our vehicles. That's how times have changed.
Sure.
It's a whole crazy world. But yes, my current knives are a lot of Damascus knives, and and they're hunting, outdoor, camping, skinning style hunting knives in a Damascus flavor, and that's what customers want. They're really specific too. I mean, I have a pattern that I make almost exclusively over and over and over, and it's a feather pattern. People just love that pattern.
I've seen it. It's beautiful. You got it dialed in.
Well, it's a headache to make, but it's fun. It looks great, and people just it's a mosaic because of the way you have to make the thing. It is a mosaic in itself, but it's something that anything you repeat over and over, you get good at, but you get tired of it. You get tired of making it. So it's fun to be able to venture off into something new every now and then. Like I just did a mosaic last week. The current knife I'm working on actually is a basket weave style pattern. And I was like, oh, yes, this is awesome. I get to work on something.
That's the one where you made the billets and then you cut it and you stacked them into 4?
Yeah.
I saw you made a video on that.
Yeah, there's part 2 coming out here in another week.
Yeah, your videos are great. I recommend people check them out. They're well done. I mean, you put a lot of effort into it, I can tell.
Well, it's not like the videos that I'm making is not like when you have a crew that can help, a cameraman, you do them by yourself, and it's taxing. A lot of work to set up all these shots and be productive, because every one of these knives that I'm making are customers' knives, and that I have to get done. This is my livelihood. So the videos are lanyard, and I have to try to get a good video made and get that knife made, get it out, because I do on average on average I do 2 Damascus knives a month. Sometimes 3. Depends on the billet and the complexity of the build, guards, pommels, that sort of thing. Because a lot of these knives I'm making now, they want stag handle and Damascus guard and a Damascus pommel. And the reason that is, I made one maybe 2 years ago, and they saw it, and everybody wants it. So stag is really frustrating to work with. For one, that's hard to get. Good stag, it's expensive too.
A lot of variables in that material.
Yeah, it's the shape, the how it's round or oblong or
where the coloring lies when
Yeah.
you start grinding it.
overly curved. You really have to be selective, and trying to buy it from dealers is hard if you're not there picking it out. So I would much rather take a block of wood, stabilized wood, and square it up and make the handle, because I know exactly the shape I'm going to get. And I don't have to guess at it. I can put that knife out a little faster. With stag, you gotta take what you get.
Now, when you say stag, is that referring to pretty much any type of horn, or is it specifically a stag horn?
Well, primarily it's sambar stag, India sambar stag, and it's really hard to get. It's because of the old embargo that's been put in place for many years now. So the stuff you're getting now is, quote, you're not supposed to be able to get it. I don't know how to. It's leftovers.
Do you work in mammoth ivory?
Yeah, yeah.
That's another odd material that seems to be a lot of variation in that material.
Yeah.
I've seen, some of it that's just beautiful and some of it that looks like it's raggedy, and it seems, and it's expensive to buy, and you grind away a lot of it when you're cutting and producing just the scales just to get to the point to where you can start to work on it. I know there's a lot of loss in that and a very high cost in acquiring it in the first place.
Yes, you're going to pay, $200 to $500 for a nice set, and you can even buy it in rounds, to cut out blocks of them. You're gonna up the price there. It's going to be expensive, and a lot of it is coming from overseas.
Yeah, they don't have a lot of mammoth here in the U.S., do they?
You got some in Alaska, but you can tell you can almost tell where it's coming from. The look of it. A lot of it comes out of Russia and Siberia.
When I first opened the jewelry store, I was really in my early days of quality blade appreciation, and I wanted to sell knives, and I did for a long time. There wasn't really any money in it. You would pay $1,000 for a knife and sell it for $1,150. It was just for the hell of having them, and I enjoyed showing them to people, and I had a beautiful display. I've since stopped doing that and really focused my efforts on fine jewelry. And I remember early on, I had a lady come to the jewelry store, and she was looking for a gift for her husband, and I showed her a knife, and she said, "What's that handle made from?" I said, "It's woolly mammoth ivory." And she kind of wrinkled her nose, and she said, "Oh, I don't like that." I said, "Why?" She goes, "I just don't like the idea of animals being killed for their ivory." And I said, "Ma'am," I said, they found this fossilized in the ground. That animal had been dead for 60,000 years. And then she realized what she had said, and it was awkward.
Yeah.
But, hey, listen, when you work with the public, you get all sorts of input. Some of it's on point. Some of it you got to let slide. But, the knife world these days has taken on a life of its own, and it's difficult to make money making them. It's difficult to make money selling them. I've seen it firsthand, and the fact that you're able to do what you're doing through social media primarily, and you're able to do direct sales to your clients and work it that way. I think a lot of people are doing that, and that's I think has been a good thing for the makers, because at least it leaves a little more meat on the bone for the guy who's doing all the work.
Right. Well, the social media has definitely helped me. I've had a clientele, I guess you'd call it, for many years that always buy from me, and that's one of the things you have to do starting out. You're going to have to build your reputation, your name, and get it out there. It's just not overnight. But social media has helped expand that and elevate that in some good ways and some bad ways. But I can say that it has definitely helped. And a lot of it is just putting yourself out there, showing your work, how you make it. I want clients to know how this product is made. So that's why I do these build videos and instructional videos, because it's not just for the other knife maker to help them. It does, but for the potential client to know what goes into this build, the quality, the techniques, and how it's going to be finished. That's awesome to know as a buyer.
I think that's what drives a lot of the value for people, and rightfully so. It doesn't matter what art craft you're in, and whether you're a painter or a cabinet builder or a welder. I think when people realize your level of skill, and they really genuinely fall in love with the notion of what you're doing, and they very much compelled, and they appreciate it. But it does take work to get people to that point. I've worked really hard with my jewelry work, and I've tried making videos of myself making pieces and the steps. Like you said, you spend a month making 2 knives. How many steps did you go through to make that knife? 300, actual processes. I mean, and that's decisions of what tool do I use? How do I drill this hole? How am I going to, fit this to this? What are my following steps going to be once I put this here? And you don't want to back yourself into a corner where you do something, you apply a piece, and then suddenly you can't finish because you've made an edge and you can't get down here. And so all of that thought and all of that effort that goes into making something is, you want people to know that, but they can't really be there and watch you do it. I've had people come in and watch me do, certain steps of a job. I've had people come in and watch me set stones or do an engraving, and they all are fascinated by how long it takes. They go, wow, I didn't realize it took that long to set a stone. Some stones go in easy, and some knives go together easier than others, but some of them, you really got to plan it out. A lot of small steps.
Well, yeah, and people don't realize, like you say, what goes into anything, and not just the steps, but the amount of labor. And if you look at, I use my former day jobs. I came up in the oil field, working in pipelines and chemical plants and refineries, welding, doing electrical work, that sort of thing. And I retired as a plant manager out of Port Allen, Louisiana, for a very well-known company. And, I thought I was retiring, put it to you that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I know what my labor was worth then. And you would think that people would understand that with anything. When you spending a couple weeks on a knife, what do you think that labor is worth? You can't get that time back. It's your time. Time is what people are paying for. The material has a good bit of value in it. I mean, just to get to make a Damascus hunting knife, for example, like you see that I post on my videos,
mm-hmm.
that knife will have a minimum of $70 in steel, delivered to your house. $70. I'll use 7 gallons of propane to get the billet made to make the knife. And propane's $3 a gallon
mm-hmm.
around home. So, and then we haven't bought any handle material. We're going to use at least 5 grinding belts on that knife, and they're average, say, $5 a piece. Some are $8, some
mm-hmm.
are $4. We haven't finished our knife. So, and the electricity, it goes on and on. But my labor is really what you're paying for. It's the time and the quality, the piece. That's, it's all supply and demand too. But the materials is just a piece of it. So a handmade quality piece it's valued by that for me, is my time. You can look at, I always ask a person, they'll tell me, I don't get this much anymore, very seldom. Somebody will say, man, there's no way, how you getting that, charging that for a knife?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I ask them, what do you make a week at your job? What is your paycheck? Just give me that paycheck. And I'll give you a week's worth of knife.
For a week of skilled labor. You're right. You're right.
That's what it amounts to. For me, anyway, you're not just paying labor for nothing. It is labor for this produced product, and it's the material is some of it.
So we talked about Damascus a few times, and for people who aren't terribly familiar with it, essentially, Damascus is a marriage of basically higher and lower carbon steels, right? Yeah.
Well, modern Damascus, what modern bladesmiths call Damascus, is pattern welded steel. You'll get, this has always been a huge debate, and most all modern bladesmiths know what Wootz steel is. They know that what we're making today is not ancient Damascus steel. It was never called Damascus steel. Damascus is a place on earth. It's
mm-hmm.
a location. It was never called Damascus steel. It was made, in certain China and India, and it was Wootz, steel that when they finished it out, however process they made, we don't have the original recipe, so nobody knows exactly how it was made. But some kind of casting, crucible process and then they made woots and that sort of thing, and it had a pattern in it. But it's a mixture of high carbon steels. They had to get it to that point. But modern Damascus is just pattern layered steel and manipulated into patterns, not just random patterns. It could be a random if that's what you want, but we're manipulating those layers to get a certain look. It's not ancient woot steel.
Mm-hmm.
And no modern bladesmith will claim that.
And by definition, the term woot means exactly what?
Woots, well, I don't know the exact definition, but it was,
as you understand,
it was a process where it was, it was cast or melted in a crucible, and similar to other methods like the Japanese do. And you're making a ball of steel from iron ore.
Yeah, I believe they call that a bloom.
Yeah, bloom. And now
they'll build like almost looks like a chimenea.
Right.
They build it out of some sort of ceramic, clay and whatnot, and then they build a fire in it and they blow air into it and they get it oxidized and hot, and then they would acquire ore. A lot of in a lot of the great steel cultures are that way because they had access to good ore.
That's
so
right.
The Japanese, they would go down to the riverbank or the creek, and there would just be ore on the ground, and they'd scoop it up and pour it into these forges. And I found that whole process fascinating. Where does it come from? And I've since educated myself a bit on it, and I know you know this stuff, but I'm just covering it. So anybody who's relatively new to this would, I recommend you look into it. It's so fascinating because people will take that ore, pour it into that little furnace from the top. Like I said, it's like a little chimenea. They pour it in, and they're steadily applying heat, and they're burning off impurities, and they're burning off anything that'll come out. And there's a lot to that, to dialing it in just right. And they'll pour and pour and pour and burn. It takes all damn day. And then they let it cool overnight. The next morning they break it open, and there'll be a little ball, and they'll pull that ball out. And then they'll start working that ball with a forge or with hammers. And as you're working it, stuff is flying out. And those are, impurities you don't want. And eventually, if you work it long enough and you don't mess it up, you heat it properly and you keep working it, it presses down, and then you end up with, a pure steel. And I've watched some videos of Japanese, sword makers. And I think they get a lot of credit, and rightfully so. Taking this ore and beating it down into little chips and then stacking it and heating it again on wood, charcoal fires.
Right.
And then just, the labor and the skill that went into this is mastery, and to watch them do it, it's just fascinating. And then to create these elegant, beautiful, beautiful blades. And a lot of those Japanese blades, had those layers of steel. And, I've often sort of thought of it like plywood, where you would have these different layers stacked in, and it creates, grain in different directions, and you may have different types of steels. A lot of times they would do a san mai, which for people who may or may not be familiar, you would have a more flexible, more, maybe more resistant steel to, corrosion on the outside, and then there would be a really hard, high carbon piece laid to the middle, and then that's all put together like a sandwich, and then it's it's hammered out into this long blade and calculated how this is going to all finish out, and they keep everything so symmetrical, and then the handwork of maintaining that symmetry throughout the blade is just fascinating, really. Right. Really something else.
Right. Well, cutting steel was high carbon steel was very, very valuable, and that's another reason why they would make the san mais, because you could use less of the good steel and more of the poorer stuff. But if you take, I don't know if you've ever seen Al Pendre's documentary. It's on YouTube. He probably has what's the closest example of woot steel that that was made or is made, and nowadays I'm sure everybody has mimicked and copied. I mean, I've been at events where they're making woots, but he has a very good documentary people should check out. He didn't have the original recipe, but he did a great job of making what he thinks was closest thing to the original Damascus steel. But it's a totally different type of knife making. But you also have to, I tell people this all the time, modern steels are far superior to the ancient steels. They were full of impurities. They didn't work them all out. Now we have foundries that make high quality steel. And if you're a good forge welder and you put these patterns together, you've got a good high quality pattern welded steel, modern Damascus. But even the mono steels are superior to the ancient steels. Their impurities, we know exactly what's going into a bar of steel. These manufacturers know how to tweak that steel until they get it just right. You take like Dr. Laren Thomas. He's the son of Devin Thomas, famous knife maker that, used to make a lot of stainless Damascus. But, Devin is a metallurgist. Laren is a metallurgist and has devoted a lot of his work to the knife industry, knife steel industry. And he just come out with Magna Cut. And of course, I'm not advertising for him, but I'm just saying that steel and any other modern steel has far superior science behind it than these ancient steels. They did the job. Bronze did the job during its time, but it's inferior to steel. So is our modern steels that we use today in knife making. It's just you can dial in the heat treatment depending on what you're using to perfection. When I did my ABS journeyman performance test, I used a piece of the most mediocre steel to make that test knife. It was 1085. So it's a 0.85% carbon. And it is the steel we use a lot, most of in Damascus steel making. It is our dark pattern. And we use a 15 and 20 with a higher nickel content to resist the etch. But the 1085 is not your Cadillac steel. A lot of people say, I like, got this perfect. There's no perfect steel. It really depends on the application. But I just took 1085 and did a good heat treatment on it, good edge geometry, ground it down to a 20 thousandths edge and a convex, and soft backed it, and did my cutting, rope cutting, 2x4 cutting, shaving my arm and bending it 90 degrees without breaking. And that was with 1085 steel.